I think it's been very, very, very important to me. I'm going to read it now. I'll read it again tonight. And I'll share it with you if you give me a minute. This is the beginning of a new day. God has given me this day to use as I will. I can waste it, or I can use it for good. What I do today is very important because I'm exchanging a day of my life for it. When tomorrow comes, this day will be gone forever, leaving something in its place I have traded for it. I want it to be gain, not loss, good, not evil, success, not failure, in order that I shall not forget the price I paid for it.
From backwoods Arkansas to play for the mighty Crimson Tide, not knowing his fame as a coach would grow deep as it did wide. He was a genuine hero whose legacy will never die or slip away. Coach Bryant, we all will remember how your Alabama teams played. And his hands were made of granite, his eyes were like hot steel. On his head he wore a hound's tooth, in his heart there pounded a wheel. And from his mouth came precious lessons, for boys who play. Secrets of winning championships for those who miss him so much today. Now the bear taught them how to win by preaching prices to pay, insisting they always show class every day and in every way. From his tower he watched them grow, champions known as the Crimson Tide. As his fame as a football coach grew as deep as it did wide, and his hands were made of granite, his eyes were like hot steel. On his head he wore a hound's tooth, in his heart there pounded a wheel. From his mouth came precious lessons, pearls of wisdom for boys who play. Secrets of winning championships for those of us who miss him today. They all remember their leader, Snake, Bob, Ozzie, and all the rest. They called Paul Bryant a superstar, as a coach, the very best. The sport has changing faces, as different heroes come and go, but the big man from Alabama was the best we'll ever know. And his hands were made of granite, and his eyes were like hot steel. his head he wore a hound's too. In his heart there pounded a wheel. And from his mouth came precious lessons, pearls of wisdom for boys who play. The secrets of winning championships for those of us who miss him so much today. From his mouth came precious lessons, pearls of wisdom for boys who play. Secrets of winning championships for those who miss him so much today.
On Christmas Eve in 1982, about a month before his death, Paul Bear Bryant considered an inspirational story he had just read. Entitled The Old Man and the Bridge, it focused on an elderly man who had spent most of his life wading across a river while going to and from work. Early one morning, a much younger man saw the elderly man constructing a bridge across the water. Surprised by the sight, he rushed forward and asked, "Old man, why are you building this bridge when you will never have to cross this river again?" The elderly man smiled and said, "Because, my friend, I hope my efforts make life easier for those who must follow this path." On that December morning, less than a week before his final game as Alabama coach, Paul Bryant said he saw no comparison to his life and the life of the elderly man. In fact, the coach said he would be forgotten as soon as he was dead and buried. But his former players, associates, and friends disagree. They view him as a leader who taught them precious lessons that have made their lives easier. For instance, some remember him as a crusty, compassionate, and comical man.
He was just a genuine person. You know, he never said anything that didn't make sense. And he was tough. He was tough, and he was a hard-line guy. I appreciated that, though. I think deep down I appreciated the discipline. You know, it was here at the University of Alabama as a player where I learned discipline. He made me learn it. You know, I didn't have any choice. It was either learn it or quit and go home. And he made it quite clear what you were like if you quit.
Others remember him as a determined, demanding, and daring coach.
I've cussed him. We all have. I mean, he was so demanding and so tough on the field, you know, and make us do this and make us do that. You look back on it, it's what we needed, but everybody's cussed him. Everybody's raised hell at him, and in the same breath, love him. Just for what he stood for and what he was making us do and what he made out of us and what he made our team. But he was very, very tough and very, very demanding and very, very fair.
Some remember him as an incomparable champion who blazed a path for others to follow and set a standard by which all others will be judged.
We got a letter one day from a man in Nashville, and it said, "Coach Bryant," and he said, "My son only has a few days to live, and his only wish in life is to meet you." And Coach Bryant got on a plane and flew up there and met that little boy, spent some time with him. And we got a letter 2 days later that the little boy had died, and how much the father just expressed how much he appreciated Coach Bryant taking his time to come up and meet that child. And it was incredible. The things he did for other people that were not known, he was a very compassionate person.
Paul Bryant lived and Paul Bryant died. Mostly, Paul Bryant won and taught others how to do the same, especially from 1958 through 1982 at Alabama. The man loved the Crimson Tide. The coach labored for the Crimson Tide. The champion led the Crimson Tide to an astounding 232 victories against 46 defeats and 9 ties. Is he forgotten as he suggested he would be? No. To the contrary, his greatness will be magnified in the future when more observers marvel over his incredible accomplishments as a man, a coach, and a champion, as well as a bridge builder whose life will continually be linked to winners.
He arrived from backwoods Arkansas to play for the mighty Crimson Tide, not knowing his fame as a coach would grow deep as it did wide.
To me, Coach Bryant as a man was bigger than life. Reminded me a lot of a character in an old John Wayne movie, or John Wayne himself. Coach Bryant lived hard and played hard and was a man's man. I never ever had a question about what he told me. I knew what he told me was going to be the way it was. And as a player playing for him, I would have done anything for him. He asked me to run through a brick wall, I would have run through a brick wall for the man.
But they'd had all kinds of movie stars and everything there, but he always had a bigger crowd. And he played better. He'd hit the ball better off the tee when they'd crowd up around him, you know. He'd get pumped up and he'd knock it down there about 2. He may not score well that hole, but he'd hit a heck of a tee shot with all those people up there yelling and carrying on. I think that kind of did things for him. He'd get all pumped up, you know, every now and then when he had all these people. So they're looking for me to hit a good shot, and I'll hit one. And he'd probably have a 10 on the hole, but he had a 200-yard tee shot, see.
He was a man of his word. You know, if Coach Bryant said he's going to call you back, if Coach Bryant said he's going to get in touch with you, he didn't make idle talk to his former players and his friends. He did what he said he was going to do.
Paul Bryant had already made successful stops at Maryland, Kentucky, and Texas A&M when he arrived at Alabama in time for spring practice in 1958. He brought a reputation as a tough man and demanding coach. Also, he had a plan for winning a national championship for a once proud program that was in disarray. In fact, it was not long before former Auburn coach Ralph Shug Jordan said his intrastate rival was changing the way football was being played in the Southeastern Conference.
And one day he was about a block ahead of me walking into Freedman Hall, getting ready to go up the steps. And for some reason or other, I noticed him glance up the 3rd floor of Freedman Hall. And just as he did, there were 3 water bags hit right at his feet. Plastic-filled bags of water hit right at his feet and splatter all over him. He immediately just took the steps, not 1 by 1, but 3 by 3, and was up into the building. By that time, I'd entered the dining hall and started through the chow line. He came in very calmly, sat down, got his lunch, and ate and left. Later in the day, I found that 2 of our players had already left school that day, right after that. So he had established pretty quick the type of reaction he would have in putting together a disciplined atmosphere and a disciplined program.
It was quite an interesting experience to sign to go to Alabama. I recall in the spring, sitting at home with my dad, everybody was interested in Alabama spring practice. That was the first time Coach Bryant and his staff had been there. And we'd watch the afternoon news and the sports would come on, and you'd see these 8 or 10 coaches. They didn't have that many players. Probably you had a coach for every 8 or 9 players. And they would show that segment where the players would come together and they'd all tackle and pile up, and then the coaches were screaming and yelling and grabbing and throwing back to the huddle, yelling, "Get back, get up, get back." And I looked at my dad, I said, "What in the world have I gotten myself into?" So it was quite a shock to see what their style of football was, because it was clearly different than what most folks around our part of the country had ever seen.
In 58 and 59, there were instances on the field where work was hard. In fact, I remember seeing an athlete actually stop in the middle of a drill and run off the field and jump over a fence to get out of practice. And all this time, Coach Bryant hollering, "Manager, manager, open the gate, open the gate." But get his gear, don't let him carry it off, or something like that. And I don't think I've magnified that any to speak of, but it was a tough situation with certain goals, certain things in mind, certain objectives that he had set in place for all these young people to experience.
Truth is, everybody was on edge when Paul Bryant started putting his signature on Alabama football. He kept few staff members after his arrival. One retained was trainer Jim Goosetree, who after a humorous start in what became a rock-solid relationship, was at the side of the man as the Crimson Tide won national championships in 1961, 64, 65, 73, 78, and 79.
I had an old car, about a 50 Chevrolet I'd bought the year before for $75. The front left door would not open. It had been painted with a hand brush, the car had. I had to wire the door shut. And one day it was raining and we were headed over to Druid Drug, a little drugstore on campus, to get a cup of coffee. And he said, well, how about me riding with you? Well, I hadn't intended to drive. I was going to walk in the rain. But he said, give me a ride over to Druid Drug. I need a cup of coffee. I said, yes, sir. And this was a routine that he followed most days as long as that establishment was over there. And we went out, and we started to get in the car. I hollered, Coach, let me get in first. Well, that was the tip-off that something was wrong. I had to get in on the passenger side over to the driver's side, and he got in the car and was in pretty good shape. He was all scrunched up, of course, as big as he was, but we started off and got down to Druid Drug and started to get out of the car, and for some reason or other, he stepped down on my floorboard, which was covered with a piece of cardboard, and his leg and foot went all the way through to the ground. And when he drew it back out, it brought blood all up and down his shin, and really it was funny, but it wasn't too funny to him. So we did go on in and have our refreshments early that afternoon, and on the way back, it was pouring down rain. He says, I believe I'll walk. And I almost died laughing, but I felt really bad about it. Now, all this time was a lead-up to trying to keep a job at the University of Alabama. Well, strangely enough, when we got back to the office, he said, boy, you really need an automobile. I said, yes, I sure do. I didn't hear any more about it. About 3 weeks later, he called me and he says, you go down and see Mr. So-and-so. He's got a little car for you. And sure enough, I went down and the man loaned me a car. So it evidently it turned out pretty good. I don't know how in the world I ever worked through that, but it was a pretty successful start.
It did not take Paul Bryant long to thrust Alabama into the national spotlight. His second team earned a berth in the inaugural Liberty Bowl. An unbeaten season in 1961, including a victory over Arkansas in the Sugar Bowl, gave the Crimson Tide its first national championship. The 1962 team defeated Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl in front of former President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Number one distinction was reserved for the 1964 and 1965 teams, and the unbeaten and untied team from 1966 deserved such acclaim. Early on, it was obvious Alabama football players were inspired in a way that made them display unusual style.
He motivated in many ways. He's definitely motivated through fear a little bit because he was such an intimidating man, size-wise, and there was such a mystique about him, so many legends about him early in his career, that this man awed many people. And I think that was a great combination of him. He inspired you to be the best you could be as a player, as a student, and basically did it through pushing you to the limit that he knew was there. And I think the fear motivated you a little bit, and then he would come around 5 minutes later and put his arm around your shoulder and pat you on the back and say, "Roy, I just want you to you know, do the best you can. That's the reason I'm pushing you here. I know what you got there and what you're capable of doing, and man, you just melt, you know, in his hand, you know, when he's giving you a pat on the back or a compliment, it just overwhelmed you and made you want to work that much harder for him, you know.
And we had to play 50 minutes to 58 minutes a game, and we hung in there, and we won in the fourth quarter. And then he pushed that, and that was his philosophy, and he stuck by that, and he got us in the frame of mind where we thought we could win, and we knew we was going to win in the fourth quarter. That was his philosophy of football, and that carries on into life, because, you know, you get into the fourth quarter in life a lot of times, and you remember those things, and it gets in the back of your mind, and it never will go away.
When he echoed a feeling about something, it was echoed by everybody else the same exact way. In other words, everybody was on the same page. Everybody was pulling for the same thing, so consequently everybody believed in the same thing.
As pleasing as the victories were, the early 1960s provided Paul Bryant with the most traumatic period of his life. First, there was a national magazine article that accused him of teaching brutal football, the result of his players hitting harder than any who had performed before them. There was an incident in which Alabama linebacker Darwin Holt fractured the jaw of a Georgia Tech player, which prompted unkind newspaper headlines.
Coach Bryant did not teach dirty football. First of all, in college football, what the guy on the sidelines or in the stands doesn't realize is that you don't have time to play dirty. Things are happening so fast out there.
But remember what brutal is. Brutal football, only time it's brutal is when one side's hitting and the other one ain't.
But how many times have I heard Coach Bryant over and over and over talk about how he wasn't the least bit interested in hurting another player, that he wanted to pursue and he wanted to hit and he wanted to gang tackle and so forth, but he wasn't interested in hurting anybody. I mean, football to him was basically three things. It was movement, sight, and contact. If you couldn't move, you couldn't play. If you didn't see things, you couldn't play. If you didn't hit somebody, you couldn't play.
Then there was the ultimate slap to his face. The Saturday Evening Post accused Paul Bryant and former Georgia coach Wally Butts of fixing the result of a game so they could bet on it. It was a ludicrous assertion, since the Crimson Tide won the contest 35-0. The Crimson Tide coach addressed the citizens of Alabama on statewide television, emphatically denying the contents of the article. He and the former Georgia coach filed massive lawsuits against Curtis Publishing. They got rich because an infuriated Paul Bryant was a persuasive witness who mesmerized courtroom observers.
Oh, he's crushed. I mean, I believe right now, that took some years off Coach Bryant's life. That's the most ludicrous thing that ever happened in the world. Here's a team that you called the dogs off, and it could have been 85-0.
It was cold, smoldering anger. I'm telling you, it was almost something you could feel emanating from him. He felt like he had been lied about. He felt like he had been maligned. And above all, he felt like everything they said was just simply not true. And I never will forget it. And I remember Benny Marshall telling me that on the witness stand, that same just contained violent anger just had that courtroom hushed.
Coach's acting is so important in the makeup of a coach, a great actor. His crowning blow, or his crowning moment, was that Schroeder had set him up to testify by using some kind of notes on some kind of plays or something that they'd used in the game. Bryant reached in his pocket and got out his notes and began to furtively search himself all over, and he kept looking at them, and by that time he had the jury of middle-class Georgia people, just absolute sitting on the front of the seat, just he had them. And Bryant searched himself, and on a stage whisper, he said, "Damn, I left my glasses on the plane." and 4 jurors jumped up and said, "Coach, try mine."
The years Paul Bryant led Alabama were filled with conquering and controversial events. From the 1950s and 1960s, when he set the stage for winning on and off the field, into the 1970s and 1980s, when most observers recognized him as the greatest coach who ever lived. Through it all, the crusty, compassionate, and comical man made it clear he was in charge of a football program he adored. Also, he used his fame to become a grand ambassador.
He was making a trip to Fordyce for a funeral on the following day with a friend of his. The first thing happened, we got mixed up. We got home from the office that day, and the friend wasn't there. So we waited an hour on him, and he still didn't show up. It turns out that Coach Bryant was supposed to pick him up at his house. So when we got that together, we leave, and we start over to Fordyce. And so he's got this bag of fish that he's going to take with him. He might want to eat some on the way, and he's going to get somebody to cook it for him. We get to a small town. I don't recall the name of it, but there's a restaurant up there, and all these cars are parked around. He said, that must be a good place to eat over there. So we could pull over there. Mr. Morgan looked at me, he said, it might be the only place to eat, Billy. You ever thought about that, you know? But we go there, and he goes in, and everybody just stopped talking. They just turn around and look. The band's there. And he goes in, he speaks, goes over and talks to the lady that's behind the counter. I want to know if she could possibly fix some fish that he's got with him out there. She says, oh, yes, I can do it, you know. So I go out and get it and bring it back to her. So all these people come over and want autographs and everything, and they start talking. So he's got a whole big crowd over in the corner there. They stop shooting pinballs and all that kind of stuff and just come on over there. So he starts inviting these people, you know, why don't you just join us, you know, for the dinner tonight, you know. And we got these few fish on a bag, and that's all we got. So finally, when he get up to about 10, I decide we better do something else. I go back and ask the lady if she'll cook a chicken or something else to go with it, you know, a couple of hamburgers. And he does. So when she brings it out, and I ended up eating a hamburger. That's the first thing I went for. I didn't want to mess with that other stuff. I didn't want the fish to run out, and he said I ate it all up, you know.
2 nights ago, I was watching TV, and Eddie Arnold was on the show, and he was discussing his son that graduated from the University of Alabama, but during that time was in a severe car accident. And I don't know the extent of his injury, but apparently it was very bad. And he mentioned that Coach Bryant visited his son, and he said, to my knowledge, Coach Bryant never came to Nashville, that he didn't call me and to check on him and just say hello. He said Mr. Bryant always worked for his university.
Whether leaning against the goalpost with the cool of fall in my hand, or gazing happily at a scoreboard with yeah, Alabama playing in the air, I have always counted my blessings, 'cause I got my football start with the powerful crimson tide which flows strongly through my heart. Alabama, you're forever in my heart. I will always be thankful just to have been a part. I will always be cheering the victorious crimson tide, tipping my hat and smiling, feeling Alabama pride. Pride will linger in my mind as I think of our teams on the field, because I know in the darkest hour, Alabama will never yield. From the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans, every step along the way, I will always cherish the memory of my alma mater and football games. Alabama, you're forever in my heart. I will always be thankful just to have been a part. I will always be cheering the victorious Crimson Tide, tipping my hat and smiling, feeling Alabama pride. Alabama, you're forever in my heart. I will always be thankful just to have been a part. I will always be cheering the victorious Crimson Tide, tipping my hat and smiling, feeling Alabama pride, tipping my hat and smiling, feeling Alabama pride.
Now for the players. We're only speaking of special type, not ordinary folks, but those who are hungry, dedicated, and have a genuine desire to excel. And more important, have great pride. Develop leaders who are self-starters that say, let's go, instead of sick 'em. Winners that are not winners but don't know it. We have had many players who played on championship teams who weren't winners in ability, but they did not know it and played like winners.
He was a genuine hero whose legacy will never die or slip away. Coach Bryant, we all will remember how your Alabama teams played.
And it's good that someone was there like Coach Bryant to grab you by the neck and grab you by the shirt and pull you back and straighten you out and not let you throw away an opportunity. I had an opportunity to play football at Alabama and almost threw it away because of being a nonconformist. And Coach Bryant is not going to put up with any kind of nonconformity. You can bet that. And he disciplined me when I needed it. And you look back on it, if he hadn't, I could have very easily thrown away what turns out to be a decent career in football.
He talked all the time about you can expect to get 5 or 10% better every day. And I think what that leads you to be is not to ever get complacent in life in any aspect of what you are doing. You know, a lot of people can get to the point where they want to rest on their laurels, but with Coach Bryant, when he expected you to get 5 or 10% better, that helped you to keep from getting complacent.
Even when we got in trouble, got behind in the game, you could see strength in his face. You know, you never saw defeat in him. In his eyes, when you looked at him, and this is things that players, that's who they look to as the head coach. And brother, you saw the fight there all the time. And that was something that he really had. He was such a competitive man, you know, in that regards. And the players could, you know, they drew strength from him immediately, always on the sideline. That's who they looked to, and he had it.
And his hands were made of granite, his eyes were like hot steel. On his head he wore a houndstooth, in his heart the pounded wheel.
As a coach, Paul Bryant was a staunch disciplinarian with an uncanny knack for choosing the right people, knowing how to deal with them on an individual basis, and molding them into a team that often resembled a skillfully programmed machine. As he often instructed his squads to expect the unexpected, his players and staff members learned to anticipate the same from him. Alabama coach Gene Stallings learned that as a Texas A&M player in 1954, when Paul Bryant conducted his famous preseason camp in Junction, Texas.
So we go down to this training camp in Junction, and it was a pretty tough training camp. But anyway, it gets a lot of publicity, and we come back and we play in the first game against Texas Tech, and we lose 41-9. Well, the game's over. Coach Bryant called us up and told us, you know, we need to go into the room, that all the Texas Tech players would have the girls, and we didn't need dates and so forth. Following Monday, when we go down to practice, all of our game gear was in our locker, which was unusual. Didn't ordinarily put on game gear on a Monday. The manager came running around, Troy Summerlin came running around and said, Coach Bryant said, put on the game gear and go out on Kyle Field. Well, we didn't know, you didn't practice on Kyle Field, that's where you played. So we sort of put on our game gear, and we all sort of like a bunch of little sheep, we sort of go out at the same time. And Coach Bryant's out there singing, Jesus Loves Me. Jesus, I said, Lord, we're in trouble now, man. So, you know, and then he called us up, and he said, it wasn't any of this loosening up, taking exercises. What he said, when the game was over, the ball's right there, and we're going to take up where we left off Saturday night. Now, that was a bad practice. We didn't get beat 41-9 anymore.
Liberty Bowl founder Bud Dudley learned about the colorful Paul Bryant in 1959, when Alabama arrived in Philadelphia by train to help launch that event.
And we met them at the 30th Street Station in Philadelphia. When they got off the train, the coach wanted to know what kind of publicity they were getting. I said, well, just fair. The Philadelphia Eagles were more or less grabbing all the headlines, and he said, well, let's have some fun. He said, Bud, when we work out today, he said, if you would, get me 22 folding chairs. And I said, what do you want them for? He said, well, I'll show you when we get down to the practice. So we went down to the Philadelphia Municipal Stadium, which is now the John F. Kennedy Stadium in Philadelphia, and he put 11 chairs on offense and 11 chairs on defense. And he put his offensive team in the offensive chairs and the defensive team, and he called a signal drill. And the players merely with their feet motioned in the direction they were supposed to go. Well, the Philadelphia press were astounded by this, and they said, well, what is this? And he said, this is a lazy man's way of preparing for a bowl game. So immediately all the cameras came out and pictures were taken, and the next day the front page of all the Philadelphia papers had this great picture of the Alabama team sitting in chairs, and this is how they prepare for a bowl game. But this showed the ingenuity of this man. I mean, he was a great promoter, and he just captured the Philadelphia sports writers, and that was, so to speak, the beginning of a long friendship I had with him.
Auburn coach Pat Dye was shocked in 1965 when, without experience, he was asked to join an impressive Crimson Tide staff.
The most vivid memory I got of Coach Bryant was when I interviewed for the job. And I'd never coached football a day in my life. And, of course, was excited about even being there, much less having an opportunity to get the job. And, you know, I think the story's pretty well told about me wearing a brand new suit over there that I hadn't even cut the tags off of for the interview. Richard Williamson and Jimmy Sharp and Dude Hennessy, and they all finally got all the tags cut off of me after we'd gone to the soup store and had coffee, and they'd all got a big laugh out of it. But in going in and talking to Coach Bryant about, like I said, about the job, and I never coached football a day in my life, and I told him, I said, Coach, I don't know anything about coaching. I said, the only thing I know about coaching is what I've learned playing, and I just played, you know, so I said, but I'll work, and I got a chance to continue playing, but if I can come to work for you at Alabama, then I'd give up playing right now. And he said, you know, he said, if we hire you, then we can't pay you much. I said, well, I just got to feed my family. I said, I got a wife and 2 kids. He said, well, now, if we couldn't feed you, we wouldn't hire you. But I don't know whether he realized how much two young children needed at that point in time, because I made $6,000 a year. That's what a graduate assistant makes now. And but he put me on the payroll that day. It was the 12th of June, 1965. And I never will forget it. When I got through the interview, he told me that he'd have to talk to Dr. Rose and make sure that it was all right with him. And what he was doing was buying a little time to call the other guys and tell them that he was going another way as far as the job was concerned. But when he gave me the job, he said, "We're gonna let you watch your linebackers." He didn't say coach. He said, "We're gonna let you watch your linebackers and recruit over in Georgia."
Paul Bryant was at his best that year. His defending national champions lost to Georgia on a controversial play in the first game, struggled through September, tied Tennessee during October, and went on to become the #1 team in the country with a victory over Nebraska in the Orange Bowl. The pivotal ingredients were an early morning practice and a motivational speech.
When we get over there that morning, and you look out on the practice field and you can see Coach Bryant's already out on the practice field. You can just see this tall, dark figure out there, and the only thing he didn't even have his coaching outfit on. He just had his boots on and his street clothes. We get out there and they put that ball on the 20-yard line. He said, "Okay, what we're going to do," he said, "we're going to take this ball and we're going to knock it in." And so we that offense, we just clicked. And then we scored about 3 times, and then he put the ball on the 3-yard line. He called the defense out there, and he said, "Okay, now we're going to play defense. We're going to stop this outfit from scoring." Defense and we went out on the field 30 minutes. So, and this is all leading up to the speech. So that was on a Wednesday morning. So on Thursday, I mean, we're just whipped. I mean, our legs are tired. And somebody had said somebody had talked to one of the coaches about, our legs are just whipped. We're dead tired. We don't have any speed. We're physically and mentally just whipped because of all this practice. So one of the coaches said something to Coach Bryant about that he thought that we were tired, or just we really ought to back off a little bit. So Coach Bryant comes in and he makes this speech about, well, one of the coaches tells me that you guys are really whipped up and you're really tired and you just don't know if you're going to be able to take anymore. He said, "Well, I just want you to know that I'm tired too." He said, "I'm tired of putting up with y'all." He said, "I'm tired of you reading the paper about how good you're supposed to be and you're really not any good." And he said, "Here I am, I'm trying to make you a better football team." And he said, "What I want you to really understand though is he said, 25 years from now, when you're married and you got 3 kids, you're going to be tired then too. You're not going to want to get up and go to work one morning. Your wife's going to be sick. Your kids are going to be sick. You're going to have hospital bills." And he said, "That's no different than the way it is right now." And I mean, it was just one of those emotional things where you really started looking at things on down the road a little bit, and you really figured out that you weren't really as tired as you thought you were.
They all remember their leader, Snake, Bob, Ozzie, and all the rest. They called Paul Bryant a superstar, as a coach, the very best. The sport has changing faces, as different heroes come and go, but the big man from Alabama was the best we'll ever know.
By the time Paul Bryant approached the age at which most people retire, the determined, demanding, and daring coach had developed unparalleled skills and was improving. In fact, former Miami Dolphins star Bob Baumhauer says a special meeting he had while at Alabama enabled him to become an all-pro defensive player. This came after the out-of-shape Crimson Tide sophomore quit the team during preseason practice because the coach demoted him to scout team status.
And his secretary showed us in, and I was expecting him to be very excited to see me and was going to, you know, try and find out what the problem seemed to be and try and work it out with me. And that wasn't the way it was at all. He invited my father in and said, "Hi, Mr. Baumhauer, really good to see you, and glad you can make it." And he looked at me and asked me what the hell I was doing there. And kind of took me by surprise there. And I said, "Well, Coach, I heard you want to talk to me." He goes, in his typical deep voice, he goes, "Hell, talk to you. I don't want to see any quitter over here." And he had turned everything around as far as my mind was concerned right from the get-go. I was going there expecting him to ask me back, and he's asking me what the hell I'm doing in his office. So he goes, "Well, since you're here, go ahead and have a seat there. I'm more interested in talking to your father, but I'll talk to you since you're here." So basically, what he did is he gave me an attitude adjustment in that meeting. And I had it in my mind that I deserved to be a starter and that I deserved to be more than what be somewhere where I wasn't on his depth chart. I thought I should be on first string, and he had me all the way down at the scrub level, so there was definitely a difference of opinion there. But what he did through that meeting is, up until that point, I really had no direction as a football player. I was happy to be a football player on the University of Alabama's team. I didn't care how good I was. I didn't care from one day to the next just how much effort I put out to be the best that I could be, and it showed. And Coach Bryant, through that meeting, explained to me that he didn't care how much ability I had. He didn't care who I was, that until I showed to him that I was willing to make the sacrifices to be the best that I could be, I wasn't going to be a starter for Alabama. And by the time that meeting was over, I'm the one who had quit. I'm the one that walked out. He had me begging to come back. It wasn't him offering me a job back. I was begging him to give me a second chance. And I really feel like, as far as my football career and my attitude in general, that was a turning point for me and gave me the ability to focus and to set goals and to do the things that I later did for Alabama and then with Miami. And it's even affected me in my business senses and my business opportunities that I've had since then.
Not only was Paul Bryant meticulous taking care of business in Tuscaloosa, he developed a passion for winning games with traditional rivals like Auburn, Tennessee, LSU, and Georgia Tech. Meanwhile, those opponents marveled over the way he changed with the times and seemed to gain momentum as years passed.
The first year we beat Auburn, which was in 1959, with Scooter Dice taking the ball in, he was really ecstatic about that game. I mean, he felt like he had sort of exercised some demons, I think, Al, and then felt like that we would be in charge from there on.
In 1961, with a national championship at stake, Paul Bryant became concerned the afternoon before a game against Auburn that his players would have footing problems on the hard turf at Legion Field in Birmingham. So he took off his houndstooth hat, put on a thinking cap, and alleviated all fears.
And lo and behold, the next morning at 7 o'clock, we were awakened by the managers out at the Bessemer Holiday Inn where we stayed at 7 o'clock in the morning, telling us, the skilled players, to meet out in the parking lot. Coach Bryant wanted to talk to us. Well, we had no idea what in the world was coming off, and Coach Bryant had talked to Fred Singleton during the night or the morning to ask if there were any other types of shoes that he had that we might try to work on that field. And they came out with a number of pairs of these Puma soccer shoes that had these soft rubber cleats with a white streak of lightning down the side of them, and they issued those to us, and we ran plays and jumped around in the parking lot on asphalt for 30 or 40 minutes, and it actually it worked like a charm. And so with that, he had Fred Singleton call all of his stores around the state and any other sources and had people bringing those shoes in, and by game time we were able to outfit most of the team with these shoes, and they worked amazingly well. Matter of fact, this Auburn friend of mine who was in that game that day, he said when we hit the field for the first time and they looked across and saw these crazy-looking shoes on our feet, they felt like we had one-upped them one more time.
In 1981, just before he became the winningest coach in history with number 315 against Auburn, the coach proved the anxiety of battling an intrastate rival could make him forgetful.
And we just had tons of requests for Auburn tickets that year. And he ran out of tickets. He said, he just thought, what in the world? Where'd all those tickets go? And everybody wanted tickets for that game that year. Big, big game. So about the end of January, I went in his office and taken some dictation, and he reached over and pulled out that top drawer. And when he did, the things in the back slid forward. Stack of 50-yard line Auburn tickets about that tall that had slid to the back when he closed his drawer. And I mean, you could have sold them, or everybody wanted them. But it was hilarious. He just looked up. He did not say one word. Just closed that drawer back, left them in there.
No other games aroused emotions in Paul Bryant like those played against Tennessee. And while leading the Crimson Tide, he had uncanny success against the Big Orange. But in 1960, in Knoxville, the coach had a nervous moment because of Tennessee kick returner Jim Cartwright.
He just roared right up the sideline wide open. And we had a fellow named Buddy Wesley playing for us, and Buddy lit into him, and he had guts running out all over him. He was so tough, Buddy was. Well, he lit into Jim Cartwright, and he happened to hit him right on the thigh. And when he did, it just knocked him cold as a wedge. Well, it happened real near our bench, and I went, of course, running right there, and the doctor's right there, and all of a sudden I just felt this eerie presence over me. And I looked back, and it was Coach Bryant, and Buddy was laying there, knocked out. And of course, with him unconscious, we didn't want to move him and everything, and all of a sudden we saw a little trickle of blood coming down his cheek. And when we did, I could just feel him bending over me and looking and peering at the lad, and he said, "Oh my God, it done killed one of us."
After a tie in 1965, when a shocking pass out of bounds on 4th down denied Alabama the chance to kick an almost certain winning field goal in the final seconds, the coach was livid when he got to the dressing room and saw his players standing outside a locked door.
Coach Bryant was right near me, and I kept hollering, hearing him holler. He was hollering, "Manager, manager!" And that's a technique, of course, to try to get the kids as a manager there. He says, "Open this door, open the door." The manager's normally the first ones there, unlike the dressing room. Have it open, the team comes in, but for some reason or other, they hadn't gotten there. He hollered about 2 more times. There was about a 6-foot area that he could back off the fence. He backed up against the fence, and he drew back and kicked that door down out of that dressing room, and I mean, there's a big oak door with a great big hasp and lock, big as my little finger on the lock, and he just splintered everything to get in that dressing room. And I think that was the most impressive lesson learned out of that Tennessee game, because those boys from then on had a feeling of urgency about how they practiced, how they played, and so forth.
The following year, an unsuspecting soul learned how Paul Bryant felt about games against Tennessee when at the airport, the president of the Knoxville Chamber of Commerce presented the coach with a travel packet like one vacationers might get.
Coach Bryant just ripped the top off the package and reached down in there and pulled out this keychain, and then he pulled out the key to the city, and he finally got to this map, and he said, he looked at this map, and he just kind of wadded it up, and he said, "Fella, we didn't come up here for no damn tour." Stuck it all back down the package and handed it back to him.
While many visitors to Tiger Stadium in Baton Rouge feared games with LSU, Paul Bryant used the hostile surroundings to his advantage. He had no apprehension when going face-to-face with Mike the Tiger.
And we all gathered around Mike the Tiger's cage, and just to kind of look at him, and he was a pretty pretty magnificent animal. So Coach Bryant goes on and walks around the field like he typically did before a game, and as he walked by where we were all standing and looking at this tiger, he kind of just looked over his shoulder and said, "I don't know why in the hell y'all are afraid of him. He's 40 years old." And turned around and walked right on in the dressing room, and it just kind of eased the tension and loosened us up a little bit.
Unfortunately, bad blood and the threat of Alabama dominance forced the suspension of the Georgia Tech rivalry in 1964, 2 years after Crimson Tide players had been pelted by whiskey bottles at Grant Field in Atlanta.
As we went out to walk on the field for the pregame warm-up, Coach Bryant had gotten all the way out of the dressing room door, turned around and went back in and grabbed a helmet and put this football helmet on, and here we are in suits and sport coats and walking around the field, and Coach Bryant's walking by the Georgia Tech student body with this big football helmet on. And I don't know what words he muttered to him as he walked by, but it was something like, "I'm ready for you this time," or something to that effect.
In summary, Paul Bryant, the crusty, compassionate, and comical man, has a long list of prominent individuals who believe strongly in him as a demanding, determined, and daring coach. They include those who played for him at Alabama, those who worked under him in the Crimson Tide program, and those who observed him up close every day.
A lot of things I think made him a great coach. I think he was a great psychologist. I really do. I think he used reverse psychology better than anybody I could ever imagine. And a great psychologist. He was well organized. He had an air about him. I think his stature, his voice, and the genuineness about the man.
Well, he was a man's man, and that's that's the way he lived his life, and he's you could say he was a maker of men, because a weak person couldn't stay around him, and that's the same is true with his players, and he, if anything, and I think that if he were sitting here, he'd tell you the same thing. He might have been too tough on a lot of them, but I think his overall philosophy of life is that, and getting you ready for that, he wanted to make it as tough as he could to get you prepared for whatever may come your way when you got out from under his wing.
He told me he didn't coach very well, and but his main thing was he could always pick good coaches to work with. But I remember when he was doing the stuff on the sidelines, it worked out pretty good. So I don't know.
I'm so happy to be asked to say a word or two about a good friend that I sorely miss and a legend that the world of sport misses, Paul Bear Bryant. He was truly one of the great legends of football. In fact, some say he invented the game. Word had it that when he first started out, the halftime activity featured the Lions and the Christians. In fact, all he knew was football players. He never met a man with a neck. When he went to Alabama, he couldn't spell Tuscaloosa, and within one season, he owned it. Bear had a heart as big as the outdoors, but on the outside, he was rough and tough. He once benched a player when he heard him singing, "Have a nice day," and that was to his mother. I mean, his houndstooth, he was lined with real hound's teeth, and there was no doubt about it, Bear was interested in winning. Once he threw a player off the team for losing the coin toss, and he prepared his winning team right at the training table. He only put out food for half of them. And Bear was not only a tough competitor at football, but also at golf. I had the pleasure of playing with him, and let me tell you, he played 18 holes, and I had 12 of my tee shots blocked. And he won the 18th hole by using the hidden ball trick. Indeed, Bear Bryant was and is a legend by all standards. As a man, a coach, and a competitor, a legend of strength, flair, and respect.
Pride will linger in my mind as I think of our teams on the field, because I know in the darkest hour, Alabama will never yield.
you know, Billy Varner and Coach Bryant were extremely close. And wherever Coach Bryant went, Billy went with him, and they were hand in hand. And he'd be walking down the hall one day, and he'd say, "Billy, let's do something even if it's wrong," you know, in a relaxed mood or what have you. And they'd leave the building. But when Coach Bryant broke Stagg's record, he was honored in Washington. And there were going to be thousands of people in Washington where they were honoring him, and it was a black tie affair. And of course, Billy, who drove Coach Bryant around everywhere, Billy Varner, went with Coach Bryant, tuxedo and everything, and got to the function, you know. And as they were coming down the entrance to the function and everything, everybody stood up, and they were applauding him coming in, tuxedo and everything. Billy was right there, shoulder to shoulder with Coach Bryant walking in, and went to the head table. They honored Coach Bryant, and it was really an exhilarating function then. And when it was over, there was a standing ovation, and they left the table, and they were going back down the aisle, and Billy and Coach Bryant were still shoulder to shoulder. And this guy stuck out an autograph pad and pencil to Billy Varner and said, "Sir, can I have your autograph?" as they were going down the aisle there. And so Billy, you know, looked around, he started signing the autograph, and Coach Bryant leaned over and said, "Billy, take your time, I'll get the car."
There was a kid over in Georgia, and I can't recall the guy's name. It was south of Georgia, and Coach Bryant, we wanted to get him to go see the kid because the kid admired him so much, we felt like we might have a shot at him. And Coach Bryant told us he'd go over there, but the one thing he didn't want to have to fly into was the Atlanta airport. And so we tried to arrange that where he could fly into a smaller airport closer to the school. And he said the other thing was he didn't want anybody to know that he was coming. The only person he wanted to know was the kid and the coach. So we tried to arrange that. Anyway, we get in the university plane, and we're heading over there in the bad weather. We have to land in Atlanta. Coach Bryant wasn't real happy about that. And then we drive down to the school. We get to the school, Al, and they've got the marching band. The whole school's let out. So that wasn't such a good experience. So we finally got back to the coach's offices back there, and there must have been a dozen reporters from the Atlanta Journal, and everybody's over there that, you know, Coach Bryant is coming to see this player. And the door was open, the press people were trying to get in, and he finally said, "Just slam the door." I slammed the door, and I caught one of those press guys' fingers in the door, and I mean nearly ripped it off. And we got back in the car, and that was a long trip coming back, I want to tell you.
I remember we were playing in a televised golf match, and Coach Bryant and I were playing Joe Namath, Steve Sloan. And I was playing pretty good, and I'd asked Coach Bryant, "What do you hit on this hole?" And he said, "Well, you can't get there a second shot." I forget what. Anyway, I knocked it past the green, and was fixing to putt. It was a par 5, and Ruth Ann walked up, my wife. Now, I'm coaching at Texas A&M now. Anyway, I 3-putt the hole. Next thing I know, I see Ruth Ann leaving. I said, "Where are you going?" She said, "Coach Bryant sent me to the clubhouse." I said, "What do you mean he sent you to the clubhouse?" I said, "You know, I don't work for Coach Bryant anymore." She said, "Well, he said you were playing pretty good till I showed up, and that I should just go on back to the clubhouse." And I said, "Ruth Ann, you came down here to watch us." She said, "I know it, but I'm going to the clubhouse."
Never Bear taught them how to win by preaching prices to pay, insisting they always show class every day and in every way.
It was on this practice field that Paul Bryant taught players how to win. It was in an office not far away that he produced authoritative plans that led to him becoming the winningest major college football coach in history, a distinction that seemed to make him larger than the sport. Still, Paul Bryant was a genuine person, perhaps one of the more down-to-earth humans who ever lived. Yes, he walked with presidents, but he was at his best with more common individuals. Perhaps that is why Paul Bryant always demanded that his players show class, that they develop spiritually, mentally, and physically until they, too, were champions.
Coach Bryant always said, football's like the game of life. Life is like the game of football. And I haven't understood what he meant until just in the last few years. And think about life as a football field, and we start off on the goal line, and as you progress toward the 20 and the 30-yard line, that's your age. And when you get to the 50, that's your peak in life. And picture the football as things that happen to you as you live your life. The blocks and the tackles are adversities that are thrown toward us. And, you know, he always said there are 5 or 6 plays that determine whether you win a game or not. Those 5 or 6 plays are the decisions you make in life, your mate, your career that you choose, your faith. And as you go over the 50 toward that goal line, the touchdown, I think, is the end of life for us. And I just never understood exactly what he meant by the game of football is exactly like life, and he's right. And those decisions are affect our life like it affected whether you were victorious in the game of football. And he always said, expect the unexpected. And how wise he was.
It was in 1971, we played the University of Ole Miss, and we won the game very handily that day. It was extremely hot, and I was on the kickoff team, and I didn't play very well in that football game. Coach Bryant knew it. My assistant coach who coached me at the time knew it. And Coach Bryant, the following Monday, called me in his office and wanted to talk to me about that game. And like any, at that particular time, college student, I wanted to make some excuses why I didn't play well, and I told Coach Bryant I was thinking about quitting. And he told me something that I've never forgotten, even to this day. He said, if you quit the first time, the second time's a lot easier. So that's something that I've learned in life real early.
Paul Bryant and the charming Mary Harmon Bryant had the opportunity to leave Tuscaloosa many times. One such occasion came at a struggling moment when the Crimson Tide was producing subpar records in 1969 and 1970. That was when the Miami Dolphins invited the coach from Alabama to lead that NFL franchise. Paul Bryant seriously considered the offer. In fact, he signed a contract, but tore it up because he could not tell the Alabama Board of Trustees that he was leaving his alma mater. So Paul Bryant stayed at Alabama and became a champion in the purest sense, winning a record 103 games during the 1970s. He and the First Lady of Crimson Tide football lived in this house at the time of his death, where they shared many special moments. On occasion, they even watched football as fans.
Offside again. That's Bonhauer.
Bonhauer.
It was. They pulled him off. He's a fine person. Sure is good at helping us recruit, too.
Who, Bob?
Yeah. He's probably responsible for us having Fay and Larry Brown and Ben Gross for all 3. Brown was 1 of 22. Pat Cross is not even starting for them, for Baltimore. So Marty Lyon told me the other day.
He ought to.
Well, why should he ought to if he's not playing well enough? You think they play that?
Well, I'm like
Worse
that
people
little
because they don't
boy.
like him or something.
You said yesterday his daddy wanted to know why I wasn't playing.
I said I'd give him every chance in the world. And I said, if you don't believe me, don't send him there.
How old is Don Shula?
Don is his son. Well, he's about
Looks about 50.
52, 3. bet they think they were a lot more than me as well as shooters done down there.
I went to see what penthouse the man was giving us and all the clubs that belonged to down and the keys and houses down there, but I like a small town.
I wouldn't live in the city.
I don't just like it, I love it. You know.
I wouldn't live in the city unless I could live like Sonny Worthington or George Steinbrenner or somebody flying like George had a apartment up there and go up and take a couple of days and get back. I just couldn't live in the city. I'd rather go off and go down here in Greene County on my son's farm.
I think most people had, really.
Paul Bryant and his beloved Alabama had many glorious moments during the 1970s, with old rivalries remaining intact and new rivalries developing with Southern Cal, Notre Dame, Penn State, and Ohio State. All of that happened after the incomparable champion rededicated himself to winning, particularly mere hours after an Astro Bluebonnet Bowl tie with Oklahoma in 1970. Making a change of a lifetime on a flight from Houston, he decided to live or die with the wishbone offensive formation.
Coach Bryant pulled out that big old leather briefcase he had, about the size of a suitcase, pulled out that ever-present yellow legal pad and the big, heavy black pen, and I just watched him. He started drawing up the wishbone. Just page after page, drawing up the wishbone against different defenses and what was going on.
And so he switched to the wishbone when he brought Darrell Royal and his crew into Birmingham in the summer of '71. He called John Forney and me to Tuscaloosa and showed us a Texas training film and told us not to tell anybody, but that was the offense that Alabama was going to. I said, between now and the fall? He said, yes.
Alabama became the talk of the nation during the 1970s with 3 national championships, and the Crimson Tide produced the most dominating period in Southeastern Conference history. In the 1973 Sugar Bowl and the 1974 Orange Bowl, Alabama lost by 1 point and 2 points respectively to Notre Dame. Meanwhile, Paul Bryant picked up a legion of admirers among the Fighting Irish.
When I got to Notre Dame, I was amazed how the people there loved Coach Bryant. From Father Hesburgh, Father Joyce, Gene Corrigan, the athletic director, Coach Faust, just people in general, people in town. I don't think a day passed that I wasn't asked about Coach Bryant or didn't talk about him, you know. And after leaving Notre Dame to St. Louis, to Phoenix, you know, it was always there. And he was a powerful man and very influential man across the country. In football, Alabama, during the years that Coach Bryant was here, there was a brand of football played at Alabama that was very unique in a lot of ways, and people liked it. They identified with Alabama football, particular coaches, high school coaches around the country. But at Notre Dame, they had a picture of Coach Bryant in the ACC, the athletic complex there, in a letter frame that he had written Father Joyce. After one of the big games, a couple of years after Coach Bryant had passed away, we had played Southern Cal on the campus there at Notre Dame, and in the dressing room afterwards, Father Hesburgh came in, the president of Notre Dame, shaking hands with all the players and the coaches, and when he kind of got around to me, we were visiting a minute, and he had a hat on that looked a lot like something that Coach Bryant wore over the years. And I said, well, Father, you look mighty handsome in that hat. He said, thank you, Mal. I said, Paul gave it to me.
In 1975, the Crimson Tide played Joe Paterno-coached Penn State in the Sugar Bowl, starting a super intersectional rivalry. While there were many memorable games, Alabama fans best recall a happy national championship showdown in the 1979 Sugar Bowl.
He called him 5 times that night and said, you know, really, we ain't worth a hoot. Said, somebody's going to beat us, and I sure would like for it to be a good team that did it, you know. He talked to him 4 or 5 times on the phone that night. Joe Paterno bit and came to the Sugar Bowl.
One of the more pleasing victories for Paul Bryant came in the 1978 Sugar Bowl, a head-to-head confrontation with Woody Hayes of Ohio State. Third-ranked Alabama won 35-6, then was dismayed when Notre Dame jumped from 5th to 1st in the Associated Press poll. Things happened during and after that game that tell us a lot about the champion.
That a part of the third quarter, we're standing there, and I think our defense is on the field at the time. And they announced that Notre Dame was leading Texas like 40-14 or something like this. And immediately when he heard that, you know, he looked at me real quick, and we just kind of locked eyes. And he said, I don't know whether to run the score up on Ohio State or play everybody. And we just kind of kept looking at each other, and he said, I'm going to play them all.
I spent 3 or 4 days at the Sugar Bowl with Coach Bryant and Ms. Bryant, Sue and I did. And before the game and after the game. And of course, I never will forget what Coach Bryant said after the ball game. It was right along about the time that Woody was thinking about retiring and so forth. And the announcer kept talking to Coach Bryant about Coach Hayes and Woody, and Coach Bryant said, no, I don't think this ball game has anything to do with whether I'm the best coach or Woody's the best coach or whatever. He said, this is just one ball game. He said, Woody's a great coach. He said, he's been a great coach for a long time. And he turned around and started to walk off and turned back around to the camera. He said, but I ain't too bad either.
No matter how spectacular his accomplishments, Paul Bryant refused to rest on his #1 laurels. He constantly reminded staff members and players that the next game was the only one that mattered.
Regardless of how successful he was never satisfied. He never reached a plateau. You win a national championship, the normal person feels, well, you know, we've done a great job. We had a great year, so everything's going to be fine. I'll have a great summer and spend the summer in Europe and so forth. He was never that way. After a great year, he was back in it just as hard in the spring as he would have been if he'd been 4-6.
Such commitment was evident throughout his career, particularly during the latter stages. It led Alabama to victory over Penn State in the 1979 Sugar Bowl, when a famous goal line stand proved to be the difference. Then, the following season, it kept the aging champion motivated as another #1 Crimson Tide team defeated everybody it played, including Arkansas in the Sugar Bowl.
Point out to them that they don't have to win, but there's a great difference in the rewards from winning than in losing. A game that cannot be played over has to be lived with for life. Point out that only special people win consistently. There's very little difference in being average and being a champion. The champion has a winning attitude on and off the field. If you have a totem pole, it's crowded at the bottom and in the middle, but there's plenty of room at the top.
As Paul Bryant entered his 5th and last decade as a coach, he was on a determined drive to become the winningest in history at the collegiate level. He had such a national following that he commanded respect everywhere, as a nationally known sportscaster discovered on a visit to Tuscaloosa. Before an interview, he boasted about all he would ask the Bear.
Was directed to the sofa, the famous sofa that all journalists know, where you sat down and you just kept going down, and so you're looking up at Coach Bryant as if you weren't intimidated enough already, and he started, Coach Bryant, there was no bear anything in that interview, and when he came out, he said, God, I have never been so intimidated in my life. And I think that was not an uncommon situation.
In 1981, the magic number was 315, the victory Paul Bryant needed to pass Amos Alonzo Stagg as the winningest collegiate coach in history. That quest brought discomfort for a tired coach. His health was failing. He had given football his all and felt somewhat empty when reflecting on how he never really had time to get to know his next-door neighbors.
My entire life's that way, really, when I think back. Are you worrying all the time, or you miss out on your children, your grandchildren, or something? You're worrying about football all the time. And my life there's been a void in it. And I don't know what that void is, but there's nothing to do about it now.
But there was something Paul Bryant could still do for his players. He continued to touch those laboring under him in a special way, as he had those before them. And he offered a generous thank you by providing educations for many of their sons or daughters.
As of right now, he has in place and has had in place prior to his death, and certainly something that's real important is the Paul Bryant Endowed Scholarship Fund. This is for the children, both male and female, of his past players. This has been a great aid to a lot of the children of his ex-players. To me, this shows his real interest in them getting an education, but more than anything, helping those that have helped him over the years.
While Paul Bryant liked being in the spotlight at times, mostly on game days, his quest for victory number 315 put him in a precarious position. Truth is, he was embarrassed by the attention and constantly reminded folks that his players had done the winning. But as uncomfortable as Paul Bryant might have been before and during the final game of the 1981 regular season, he was charming and gracious when it was over, and Auburn coach Pat Dye offered congratulations.
Governor Carter just called me.
Governor Reagan.
Carter. Well, Reagan too, but Governor Carter, I thought she'd appreciate that more.
I ain't no damn politician. Oh, man. Did the president call you?
Sure, he called me. Oh, sure. Anybody, that's always great. That's a whole lot better than getting out in front and breezing through. I think it does players more good, too. More helpful to them in their future. You know, they're going to get behind sometime down the road when they're trying to make a living. No point, I ought to be carrying them off the field. I would if I was strong enough.
Did you tell him not to?
No, I sure didn't. I could, if they had given me time and I'd had enough strength, I'd take them all one at a time and stay here till midnight to do it. I'm so proud of them. Coaches, too.
Paul Bryant was weary and in failing health when his final season arrived in 1982. In August, his doctors advised him not to coach another year. But his commitment to Alabama and his players left him no option except to continue.
He made himself, or willed himself to make it through the year. And I believe he did. I believe he was just that tough mentally, that he made himself live, by golly, until he finished that season, because he just decided he wasn't ready to die until the season was over. And, but he knew, I think, that he was limited in time.
What I saw the last year of his life was a man in very bad health, that only the will to live carried him through the last part of that. He was so ill the last season that I really was very concerned about him. He would lie down in the mornings and then at noon for a short time, just for some rest. And I really thought there in the first part of October that he wouldn't get up. And then one day, Dr. Hill came in, and Coach Bryant buzzed me. He said, "Would you get Coach Goostree for me?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I need him to bring some Band-Aids up." I said, "Coach, I've got some right here on my desk. I'll bring them in. That's okay. That's fine." So I go in, and Dr. Hill is giving him an injection. And from that day, he gradually got better. And that was about 3 weeks before we played Auburn, the year before he died. And he got a little bit better every day. And after Auburn came, I thought, man, we have got it made. He's going to be okay. You know, he's so much better. And the day he had his news conference announcing his retirement was the best I saw him look in quite a while. He was totally in charge, felt well, looked well. And about 5 weeks after that, I went home on a Monday afternoon at 4:30, and not knowing that'd be the last time I saw him.
For a while, it looked as if Paul Bryant would will his team to another national championship. The Crimson Tide was ranked #1 when it played Penn State in October, but the coach insisted Alabama was not that good. Perhaps he knew that when he used a magical touch motivating his players before a convincing victory over the Nittany Lions. For sure, the champion was not pleased when many squad members showed up for the pregame meal not wearing ties.
We come down for the pregame meal, and they come walking in. They've all got sport coats on and dress shirts, but no ties. So we're all sitting there again. He's puffing his long Chesterfield, and he looks out over there, and the waiter comes in and just waiting for Goosetree, the trainer, to give him the nod. And he stands up and he says, "Wait a darn minute." Of course, he didn't say darn. He said, "I thought we traveled in coats and ties and shirts and ties and coats. Where's your tie? Who ain't got a tie on? Get out of here." They had bellboys and waiters and whatever you want to call it. And they had, I think you've seen around hotels and motels, they all had those real big exaggerated bow ties. Some had string ties. Some of our fans and alumni in the coffee shop, they're taking ties and everything off of them. I think the wives naturally traveled with us, and I know Coach Bailey's wife, Mildred, stood on the balcony, and she must have thrown 3 or 4 ties off the balcony. It didn't matter whether it was a plaid, a solid coat, a solid tie, and a plaid, whatever. They came in, and I'll never, one of the great athletes, you know, let's say our free safety or our starting quarterback came in, and he looked like Captain Kangaroo. He had the yellow bow tie on. It was about that big, and he stood up and looked around, and everyone just scared to death. We got to beat them. National TV, Penn State, Joe Paterno. We're going to add to the number. We're going to get closer to the 323. And he looked around and he said, "Damn it, you look better now." And the whole squad, the trainers and the managers and all, just burst out in a big laugh. Everyone ate real good. Went to the stadium and played excellent that afternoon.
Then the bottom fell out on Alabama. Down the stretch, the Crimson Tide lost to Tennessee for the first time in 11 years, to up-and-coming Southern Miss, to LSU for the first time in 11 years, and to Auburn for the first time in 10 years. For a variety of reasons, bad health included, Paul Bryant knew it was time to quit, as realized by his successor, Ray Perkins.
Very tired, worn out, a guy that had spent himself, you know, a lot of years, had spent himself, and really with one concern in mind, and that was trying to teach other people how to win.
Ultimately, it came down to a final practice on Thomas Field in Tuscaloosa and a final game against Illinois in the Liberty Bowl. In a sense, it was the beginning and the end, as Paul Bryant returned to the bowl game he had helped launch in 1959. It was cold in Memphis as an international audience watched the great champion from Alabama go for and get a final victory on what Liberty Bowl founder Bud Dudley recalls as an emotional evening.
I think it was probably the most historic college football game that has been played in modern times. There was a tremendous amount of national press and attention. We really were inundated with press requests for the game, and our stadium couldn't hold the number of people that wanted to come in here from all over the country. And we set up all sorts of temporary facilities, particularly after the game. When it was over, we couldn't handle the press in the normal locker room size, so we, through the efforts of Charlie Thornton, who we asked to come and help us out with the press problems, we set up a tent adjacent to the stadium. And when the game was over, there's so many people try to surround the coach and congratulate him and hug him and so forth, that it took us a long while to get him to the tent. And when he arrived, he was, you could tell he was rather tired and worn out. It was the most interesting press conference I guess I've ever attended.
And I think I'm tremendously proud for winning this game, because I told them before the game, in a minute, whether they wanted, whether they liked it or not, or whether I liked it or not. This people are always going to remember them for this game. They're always going to remember me for this game. And just because of the circumstances. I'd a whole lot rather feel sorry for a nice young guy like Mike, whose future's ahead of him, and have to look at that last roundup forever. And I think it'll make my future years or year or whatever it is a little more pleasant. I don't think it'll take anything away from them.
Alabama players were inspired that night, and they delighted spectators with their intensity. Meanwhile, fans watched while feeling both joy and sadness, plus with gratitude for what Paul Bryant had contributed to football. When the final game and the hoopla surrounding it subsided, the champion returned to his hotel suite and did a lot of sentimental thinking.
It really was like a movie scene. I'm serious about that. Coach Bryant was sitting in a straight chair in the middle of the room, which was a fairly big room. And there were hors d'oeuvres, and there was a bar set up. Billy Varner was there, and Paul Bryant Jr. And then just us. And that was all. Nobody ever, why, for whatever reason, I don't know, but we were it. And he finally turned around to me, and he was just gray. He was ashy, and he turned around to me and said, "Do you think it's a good game for TV?" And I said, "Coach, Lord, yeah, we came from behind. It was exciting, and you know, the tribute to you as you were carried off the field was something anyone who was there would never forget." And he said, "Well, I'm glad to hear that." And anyway, one of the things that touched me was we told him, we said, "Coach, we came in the same time the team did," and I said those boys were just jumping up and down. They were so happy. And he said, "John, the worst thing in the world would be for them to have lost this game." He said, "Not for me, but for themselves."
For Paul William Bryant, triumph turned into tragedy. For those who loved him, ecstasy turned into agony. Less than a month after his final game, the greatest of them all was dead, the victim of heart failure. A nation grieved his passing, but with the assurance the man, the coach, and the champion had mastered life and had taught those fortunate enough to have been around him the secrets therein.
It just tore me up. I mean, it's the only way you could put it. Because he was just a one of a kind. I mean, he meant a lot to so many people, and I realized if you were against him, you could pick out all kind of things that are wrong and bad with him, but if he was for you, buddy, you had a staunch ally.
What makes it so bad is it was so unexpected at that time. See, I'd been up there all night and up there that morning, and I'd gone over to the house and brought his daughter back to see him. And she talked to him. He'd given me messages, and he was laughing and joking that morning. And after his daughter visited with him, I drove her back home. And I said, well, I can go on now. I felt like everything was all right. So I went home, and I got there, and I said, let me call Linda and let her know where I am in case, you know, she needs me or something. And I called her back and found out that he'd taken the turn. And that was within an hour after I left there. And I went back up there, and it was gone.
The most touching, heart-rending thing I've ever been through was the drive from First Methodist Church in downtown Tuscaloosa down 10th Street, which is now Paul Bryant Drive, seeing little children from the kindergarten, from grammar school, seeing nurses, surgeons on the side of the street, doctors, people that didn't really know why they were there particularly, but they loved Paul Bryant, they loved Alabama football. And there were many, many faces that I looked into that had never seen an Alabama football game.
I saw an old man with overalls on his front porch, sweeping the front porch, and as our procession came by, tears were rolling down his face. He probably never met Coach Bryant or saw him face to face, but he was crying for that man that had died. We went down McFarland Boulevard. There's a little kindergarten class with red hearts in their hands. I love you, Bear. We miss you, Bear. And it was a sad, sad time for all of us.
You know, you think that somebody as big as life, that huge aura that surrounded him, the person that he was, you know, you think will live forever, you know, and it was almost like the first thing that came to my mind was, well, I've broken all the records as a winningest coach of all time and done everything that I can do as a coach, and it's time to go. A civilian, I don't think he would have been. He didn't want to be. I mean, I'm through coaching, so I'm through here. That was the first thought that I had, going to something else at a different place. You know, and it's just unfortunate. I mean, everybody has to, but, you know, somehow you think he's still around.
He arrived from backwoods Arkansas to play for the mighty Crimson Tide, not knowing his fame as a coach would grow deep as it did wide. He was a genuine hero whose legacy will never die or slip away. Coach Bryant, we all will remember how your Alabama teams played. And his hands were made of granite, his eyes were like hot steel. On his head he wore a houndstooth, in his heart the pounded wheel. And from his mouth came precious lessons, pearls of wisdom for boys who play. Secrets of winning championships for those who miss him so much today. Now the Bear taught them how to win by preaching prices to pay, insisting they always show class every day and in every way. From his tower he watched them grow, champions known as the Crimson Tide. As his fame as a football coach grew as deep as it did wide, and his hands were made of granite, his eyes were like hot steel. On his head he wore a houndstooth, in his heart that pounded a wheel. From his mouth came precious lessons, pearls of wisdom for boys who play. Secrets of winning championships for those of us who miss him today. They all remember their leader, Snake, Bob, Ozzie, and all the rest. They called Paul Bryant a superstar, as a coach, the very best. The sport has changing faces as different heroes come and go. But the big man from Alabama was the best we'll ever know. And his hands were made of granite, and his eyes were like hot steel. On his head he wore a hound's tooth, and his heart still pounded a wheel. And from his mouth came precious lessons, pearls of wisdom for boys who play. The secrets of winning championships for those of us who miss him so much today. From his mouth came precious lessons, pearls of wisdom for boys who play. Secrets of winning championships for those who miss him so much today.